Hi there, Dan. This is Peyton. You asked for a video, something about which I was thinking for Gush Turbofog as an age to its submission, and if this is too late, and that's also fine. This is hopefully going to be a short, quick tutorial on the interactions of the deck, as well as quick, basic sideboarding things. I will submit to a more detailed plan shortly. That being said, I've seen you play against Turbofog in a couple of matches. I believe last year, although not very recently, the deck has fallen out of favor. Ergo, I will reacquaint you with some of the basics. The goal of the deck is to repeatedly fog the opponent in order to prevent combat damage, while at the same time milling them with Jace's Erasure. Some decks use also a Curse of the Bloody Tomb, and I've included two in the sideboard, which I'll explain a little bit, but I find it to be too slow for the main deck. So Jace's Erasure is the primary win condition, and one wins with Jace's Erasure by drawing a ridiculous amount of cards while this is in play. Just drawing the one per turn for the standard draw normally is not enough to win. That would take many, many turns. Ergo, we have cards like Accumulated Knowledge, Brainstorm, and most importantly, Gush. Ponder technically counts, but it only draws one card. It's more of a draw fixer and consistency booster. That being said, Gush is the primary good card in the deck. It is very synergist with cards like Tolarian Winds. The whole point of Gush is to have essentially a free draw spell, which is important with the Erasure, as normally we want to spend our mana casting Fog during the opponent's turn, and using Gush to draw cards is technically free. That being said, we have all of the draw effects, as stated here. Our Fogs of choice are 4 copies of Fog, 4 of Moment's Peace. Moment's Peace is integral because it does have flashback, and it is completely reusable. 2 copies of Respite. Respite is okay, but basically every other Fog in the deck is better. It's not going to do all that much. The 1 life is only relative against decks like Burn, or in some cases MBC, where they may be trying to corrupt you. And the final Fog, this is the Fog about which I'm most excited. This is Tangle. Tangle has never been legal in Pauper before the printing of Vintage Masters, where it was printed as a common. Ergo, it is literally the best Fog in the format right now. It's essentially a Fog this turn and a Fog next turn, unless they have a creature with haste, for only 2 mana. It's sort of similar to Moment's Peace, but requires no flashback mana. It's really overall just a great card, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to build and play with this deck. Tangle is absolutely key, and it is usually, if we're boarding out Fogs against decks that have no creatures, this is usually the Fog that stays in, sometimes Moment's Peace. It all depends on something against Burn, where a creature like Kildin Marauders with Vanishing. Moment's Peace is technically better because Tangle tapping it the next turn and preventing it from untapping doesn't really do all that much. That being said, the deck also has support cards. Ponder fixes draws and is good at finding all of these lovely things. It's very consistent. There are a lot of 4-ubs. And the other support card here is Muddle the Mixture. Muddle is important. It is Erasure number 5 through 8, and it is also a counter spell. Primary target pre-board is going to be Corrupt, and against Burn, any Burn spell. That's Muddle, and the rest of the main deck, all basics. I don't really want to be losing too much speed to tap lands, but in order to help Brainstorm and thin out the deck, I may want to include, at the most, maybe 3 Evolving Wilds, or something of the sort. That being said, that's the gist of the main deck. You generally want to start fogging once you get an Erasure in play, or as soon as their damage starts becoming relevant, to the point where it could become lethal very quickly. So, Fog is only 1 mana. This was the easiest to leave up. The rest cost 2, except for Moment's Peace Flashback. Basically, once you start fogging, you can't really stop, or there's a large chance you might die, because they will, most decks, such as Mono Black Control, even Delver decks, can just throw out enough creatures to the point where every attack they make is lethal, so you have to fog every turn. That's where Tangle and Moment's Peace become very good, and to an extent, Respite. But knowing when to fog, that is definitely one of the harder parts. I would say go with your gut. If you feel like you can't take the damage, absolutely fog it. Unfortunately, there's no way to get the fogs back except for Moment's Peace. The potential for Reclaim is... let me see if I can pull up an image here. Yes, the potential for Reclaim in the sideboard is possible against decks with Graveyard Hate, but the sideboard is fairly tight. That being said, draw spells. Tolarian Winds is definitely an odd one. So Tolarian Winds is designed to be a one-shot kill. That's why there are only 2. With maybe 3 erasures in play, Tolarian Winds and a fairly full hand is quite possibly lethal depending on how much you've milled the opponent beforehand. It synergizes very well with Gush. After gushing, you have 3 more cards in your hand than you did before you cast Gush. You have both the 2 islands and you have the 2 cards that you drew. Therefore, gushing with Tolarian Winds can potentially increase the chances of a one-shot if you don't need your lands anymore. Keep in mind you're also liable to draw more lands with Tolarian Winds and have a full grip. Muddle the Mixture also finds Tolarian Winds if that's a necessity and the potential for a one-shot is there, and it also finds things like Tangle, and all of these other good stuff. The cards. That's the gist of the main deck. You draw your cards, you fog the opponent. For the sideboard, sideboarding for this deck is fairly simple. There are a few general categories. The sideboard is really, really, really good against Burn, because Burn is traditionally a god-awful matchup for Gush, Turbofog, and Turbofog variants in general, because you can't really fog burn damage. Therefore, 3 Nourish and 3 Quiet Disrepair are very, very important. Generally, Quiet Disrepair is cast enchanting a Jace's Erasure, and gaining 2 life every turn is hopefully enough to outpace the burn deck. Nourish supplements this, 6 life for 2 mana. For 2 green mana, they have to pay 2 red mana for 2 lightning bolts in order to become neutral, and you only have to use 1 card. And this can be muddled for. This can be muddled for, if necessary. So can Quiet Disrepair. Quiet Disrepair is also very, very versatile, and it comes in against Affinity. And usually decks run Spire Golem as well. You can enchant their Spire Golem with this, and then you can either gain 2 life every turn and negate their attacks, in essence, or you can merely destroy it. Bringing this in against Affinity is also good. You can nuke their lands, you can just soak up damage if you're fogging. The thing about Affinity is that Atog Fling with Disciples, if they have time to build it up with enough artifacts, they don't need to attack, which means that Quiet Disrepair is important for destroying such permanents, or simply gaining life in order to hopefully circumvent damage. In the board, I also like a healthy 6 counterspells, 2 Arcane Denial, and 4 normal counterspell. Usually these come in against Burn as well. You remove the majority of your fogs and replace them with counterspells. Arcane Denial is very good with an Erasure in play, because it lets you draw a card, and the opponent is also drawing cards, which is sort of like milling themselves, in that it lowers their deck count, but it does give them cards in their hand. And it also does not require 2 blue, which is a bonus. Standard Counterspell, very good against a variety of decks, usually comes in against tempo decks as well in general. Capsize is against any permanent heavy decks, especially if you expect the game to go long to the point where you can acquire at least 8 lands or so in play, so that you can buy back your Capsize and continue to repeatedly bounce their permanents, bounce their lands, bounce things with tokens. It's a fairly versatile card. And lastly, Curse of the Bloody Tomb is specifically for 2 types of decks. Either the ones that are going to bring in a lot of enchantment hate. They will be unable to cope with basically what is 10 enchantments with the models that find the erasures. But the curse should allow you to win the game against those just by having extra auras that are threats. They also generally come in against tempo decks or slower decks, decks that are trying to grind, because you don't have to resolve as many draw spells for erasures if you have a curse in play. It's 2 extra cards per turn, which goes quite quickly, especially if you have an erasure in play that's continuing to mill. That's the basic gist of the sideboard. I will provide you with a more detailed plan very shortly. If you have any more questions about the deck or would like more specific lines of play, please let me know. I am happy to help. Thank you for your consideration. Have a nice day.